Hello friends, once again, and we find ourselves in another assessment support video for Researcher Development 1. I'm going to get straight into it because we are talking about, wrong way, that way, Assessment 3, the MRes Project Development Report, which is like the big capstone assessment for your first sort of part of the MRes, the first semester. It's basically like a draft thesis proposal. We used to call it the draft thesis proposal, but it became clear that that was not a very helpful name because it's more a report on the development of your project in line with the proposal, set of proposal categories and subheadings. But we don't expect you to be drafting the proposal right now because your project is still in development. Right? So that's the first important point. You don't need to propose a completed, ready-to-go research project. This is a preliminary report, primarily intended for your supervisor. That's the next important point, so that they can support you on your journey, especially as you move towards Researcher Development 2. The graduate school, that is myself, Alex, and Alex Norman and Alex Ray, will also mark part of this assessment, which I'll explain shortly. But the main work, the main sections are going to be marked by your supervisor. So I'm recording this video in week 7, which means that at the time of recording, we haven't really spoken with you much about this assessment. So the aim of the video is to provide a little bit of a sort of an overview of this worksheet so that you can use it as effectively as possible. Make sure it's as helpful as possible. We assume that a lot of you might be looking at this closer to week 15, the date of submission. If so, hi, it's still kind of COVID crazy madness at the moment, and I don't know what that'll be like on Friday the 12th of June in week 15 when this assessment is due. So 1,500 words, 40%, nice and simple. 1,500 words doesn't include the titles, references or subheadings, the references or the subheadings. Week 15, June 12. Now, of course, in light of all of the disruption caused by the global pandemic this semester, if you need an extension beyond that date, you will be able to get one. The added complexity here, though, is that we'll need to coordinate with your supervisor for marking if you need an extension. And because this is near the end of semester, there can be, if you delayed it, say, even to week 17, it's likely that your results wouldn't be released because we would have to finalize all of those results for a certain date. And you'd obviously still get a result eventually, but it'd just have to be processed a week or two later. So try and stick to week 15 if you can, but if you need more time, that's absolutely no problem. Now, in the spirit of these videos, I'm not going to read the whole worksheet. I'm just going to point out a few important parts of it. So the aim of this task is to show that you are developing a research project that sort of addresses a research problem or a research gap in your area, in your field broadly considered, because a lot of people float between different fields. So you can almost get rid of that if you know that that's too constricting for you. And an appropriate methodological approach to the question, right? This is where you'll need to work with your supervisor. So the project doesn't need to be fully formed, but you do need to show that you are working towards it. And when we say working towards it, that you'll demonstrate that in these 6 sections of the report. So every report is called MRes Project Development Report, and then you'll have these sections. So you'll have a title for your project, the project description, and the impact and significance section. They're both going to be about 250 words, so about 500 words for those 2 sections. And then these 2 sections, 3 and 4, they're the ones that are marked by your supervisor. And they total about 1,000 words. And you can sort of split that however you need, because for some people it's quite different. For anyone who's playing along at home, you might recognize these little symbols here. This is not a cross, but a dagger, if you remember from the lecture in RD1 week 1, which was the only lecture we had face-to-face for the unit, aside from week 0. irrelevant if you don't remember that or don't know what I'm talking about. That, of course, is called an asterisk, which I think just means star. You can see the percentages here as well. Again, we really hate putting these kind of numbers onto it. We don't think that's really the best way to evaluate you, to help you learn. That is how the system does it. Eventually, we'll move towards satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So for the whole report, it's just pass or invite to resubmit. That would be much better for you, much better for everyone, but we've got to do some more administrative work to get there. So I guess the other thing I'll point out before we look at the sections, these sections in detail, which are sort of down here, is to remind you / tell you, if you haven't been around when we've mentioned this or you haven't seen it, that we are going to do consultation sessions in weeks 12, 13, 14. They will obviously take place via Zoom, but it'll be a chance for you to maybe run a bit of a draft of this report by us, or even if you're sort of struggling, you can talk to us about the report and we can help you try and get on track. Of course, you should be working with your supervisor towards the development of this whole project, all of the sections and whatnot. And we can't, Alex and I can't give you really detailed sort of methodological advice, but we can help you think about project planning, help you think about articulating your research question, which is often a really big barrier. So that option will be available to you, and we'll release probably like a doodle poll or something similar where you can book in times. So watch this space, or that space. I'm only going to read this first line to you here, but it is worth reading. A research proposal is intended to be both informative and persuasive. Informative and persuasive. It will be persuasive because it is informative, but just because it's informative doesn't necessarily mean it's persuasive. So you'll need to argue for, you'll need to, on the one hand, to explain what the project is, but you'll also need to contextualize that within like a significant problem or issue that the research is addressing. We'll come to that shortly if that doesn't make much sense. But strongly encourage you to read all of this. The assessment criteria then, and I should actually point out that these criteria they're not exactly the same. They look kind of similar, but these are sections for the report and these are the assessment criteria. So just bear that in mind. The title you should work on with your supervisor. We'll give you feedback on the title, but we don't really mark you on the title per se. What we mark you on is the project description, which is going to be roughly 250 words. You'll actually have to do a shorter abstract in Research and Development 2, 150 words. The proposal is 3,000 words, but the abstract is actually shorter. But here it's actually a bit easier in some sense to do longer. And I can't stress this enough. Use this as the structure for your project description. We don't have an example for you right now. We tend not to give examples of this because it is, we really face the problem of people copying the example just too closely. Not plagiarizing, but just not realizing that they need to do it in their own way. This is the kind of thing we can help you with, particularly if you see us in a consultation. We can try and help you tweak up the way that you introduce your project in this way. But I should say that you probably shouldn't spend too much time doing this at the start. You could maybe draft out something and see how it's looking when you just sit down and write it. But really, you should do the other sections and then come back and summarize them here, because this project description should summarize sections 3 to 5 of the report. What are sections 3 to 5? That's the background lit review part, proposed methodology, and the impact and significance section. So, I mean, I'd like to spend more time on this, but I don't want to, we could spend ages on it. We have a whole week on this in RD2, and in some senses, we should have that week for you to prepare this, except that we find that it's almost too early. Like, hopefully you guys will pay attention to this, but more the point is just seeing how well you can sort of use this general set of guidelines and work with your supervisor to prepare something. And then in RD2, we really start trying to refine it. So it's not the best approach, but it's kind of how we historically have run things, and it's a bit hard to change that without changing a lot of other things. But I would say again, the biggest sort of point to stress is come and see us in consultation if you want help with how to do this, because I don't think I've ever seen a draft that couldn't be improved. So we can definitely help you. These sections 2 and 3 are, as indicated by the black and white, black background, white text, are marked by your supervisor. Label, is that the word I was going for? These labels? I don't know. This is a bit clumsy and confusing. But like obviously, if they're marked by your supervisor, you're going to want to talk with your supervisor, because they're going to tell you what they expect in these sections, and sort of not just what they expect, but what you should go and try and do. Sorry, there was an alert that came up. We only give you some really general advice here. And when we say you, we mean like the entire RD1 cohort, which includes obviously students from every discipline. If this were a Master of Research in Chemistry, or a Master of Research in Sociology, or a Master of Research in Health Science, whatever it may be, this would be much more specific. But obviously, it's broad. Hopefully, though, that will form an important part of your training. Certainly, that's our intention. That understanding not just kind of what a research proposal in your area should do, but what a research proposal in general should do. If you can properly absorb all of that, that's going to place you in a really strong position to write a lot of things, not just proposals, in the future. It overlaps with how you write the introductions of articles and how you review things and all of that stuff. So I'm actually not going to read these, I think, because you guys can read them, and you guys can go and speak with your supervisors in the first instance. Of course, chat with each other if you're speaking with your peers about this, and then come and speak with us in consultation if you also want a bit of a check-in on how your planning looks on paper, or if you're sort of not sure how to write up your methodology because you're not entirely sure how to explain it in the first instance. Whatever it is, you can come and speak with us. We have this little note here about students who sometimes worry that they don't really have like a clear and obvious methodology, like an experimental methodology. When we say methodology, this can mean like including the like theoretical framework that you will use. So if you will use feminist theory to sort of interrogate digital media practices, for instance, just making something up, you would talk about how you were going to apply a theoretical framework to, in that case, you'd be doing some data collection as well. You'd be looking, say, at online output, whether it was tweets or stuff about programming culture or whatever it was. So the point is, everyone can talk about their project in terms of methodology. You might have multiple kind of methodologies that form, multiple methods that form the overall methodology. Some fields actually distinguish quite clearly between methods and methodology. I know nursing is one, for instance, at Western Sydney, they're quite strong on that. Methodology is the account of the methods that you'll use. So if that helps you to break things down, like you've got the methods are your tools and the methodology is a description of the methods. Includes theoretical perspectives. So yeah, if you're having problems, come and speak with us. Right, impact and significance. This one can also cause a lot of difficulties. And the first thing to say is that it used to be called the impact statement. We only just changed it this semester because impact statement, impact is a really problematic term. We will go into this later, and there's a lot more in RD2. On the problematic side, well, it's justifiable, the idea of impact, because a lot of research is taxpayer funded, and for it to be sort of justifiable to fund that, it's got to be addressing something relevant to society, which is really, really broad. Everything from the full spectrum of the disciplines. So all disciplines contribute valuably. But it's this idea that, you know, your research project is not just a personal interest project. It's actually sort of contributing to a conversation about something that's going on in the world. It's relevant to the way humans live their lives and the impact we have on the planet and the other beings around us. But when you're planning a project, you haven't yet had any impact. Well, the problem with impact as well is it can make people feel like you've got to be doing something really obviously impactful, or like economically impactful, or like something where there'll be major economic investment, or some obvious like health outcome, or some obvious educational outcome, or whatever, social service policy outcome. Whereas a lot of people doing more theoretical work can find this really challenging. So with that big preamble, I would say think especially about the disciplinary contribution of your work. This is the section where you tell the reader of your proposal, like you will have indicated already in the background section, like justifying your research question in terms of its intellectual background, and includes like the significance and of like why the problem is worth investigating. Other people have done a whole bunch of stuff, but we don't know this, so my project will look at this further. And the impact statement is the section, impact and significance section is the place where you elaborate on that in 250 words. So there's a lot of overlap with previous sections. Like you don't copy and paste, but you'll be talking about a lot of the same ideas. And down here is actually a bit of a structure that you can kind of follow. So this is also something new we've included. We've ripped this over from RD2, where we do teach this, but we decided to put this in because we also gave you this little structure. We're giving you this kind of structure as well. So a good way to approach this is to sort of restate the context. It was introduced in your background section, like the gap or the problem, because your literature review will, in some way or other, set up a problem that needs to be investigated. You'll then kind of, and you'll emphasize the gap in particular, be sure to emphasize the gap, and then you can kind of explain the contribution of your project, like my project will, one of those types of, or this project will. Don't say this research, they say this project, because the project is the thing you're proposing. And then you can explain the benefits of the contribution, which will make a lot of sense if you've set up the background well. Again, we don't have an example to show you, or we've chosen not to put an example in the worksheet to show you. So that's something that we can really talk with you about in consultation. And it's also, again, like this is a chance for you to try, and the real main show is in RD2. I should also say, does it say in here? I hope we put this in. Well, we didn't put this in, so I guess this is a tip for watching the video. This section should have references. This absolutely should have references. A good impact and significance section will include at least a couple of references, probably ones that have been used up above in the background section. Yeah, so I might leave that there, because I feel like I could talk for a long time about impact, and I don't think it'll be that helpful. We'd need to do a more organized discussion of it. So hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of a sense of what to do with this section. Like, understand that this is a good structure to follow, roughly. Like, obviously it's sort of up to you, and the nature of the project will dictate it to you, but that's a rhetorical structure. And these are some tips about how to think about composing that. And you don't need to stress if you can't think of many impacts beyond the discipline. But whatever it is that you're doing, that's something you can just reach out to us about sort of quickly as well. Is everyone should be able to work out in some way the disciplinary contribution that their project would make if it was allowed to go ahead, which it will be. But sometimes it can be hard to think about how is it helpful for people outside my field. Like, we could even have a little meetup, RD1 meetup, to discuss that, because that's really hard to explain without just talking one-on-one with people, or like, you know, in a group, but like sharing individual examples. This is an important and very challenging question to think about as well. Why does my research matter as a contribution to human society? It's a provocative question, but it's one that like everyone can give a really positive, affirmative answer to that, but it's rare that people know how to do that without a bit of guidance. So we don't have full guidance for you here, but in getting you to do this, we'll be able to work on you in better ways to develop that, and especially as we iterate this task into RD2. Clear, organized, persuasive, and in this case, valuable. You might recall that for the learning journal, A2A for this unit, we actually deliberately left off the word valuable in that sort of hierarchy of good writing being clear, organized, and persuasive, and then valuable. We took valuable off because we didn't want to put pressure on for your reflective journals, and that's not really about value in the way that is meant in that like value for readers kind of sense. Here though is where you really need to start thinking about value, because people who aren't us are going to be reading your work. Supervisors and potentially their colleagues are going to be reading your work, and a good proposal is one that makes the project seem valuable, not just viable, but valuable. Gosh, that's good. We haven't used those two words together. Viable means like doable, achievable, realistic, good scope, good plan, feasible in all aspects. Valuable is worth doing, given the limited resources that we have. Pretty much anything can be made, like the value of anything can be argued to be valuable enough to do. So there's a real art in how to do it. I would have probably also stressed this as the other key point to think about in terms of written expression. This in particular, if you are clear in your own mind about the research problem you are addressing, like it's so common for people at your stage now, RD1, developing a research proposal, working out the whole researcher thing, to approach this task and not be really fully clear on what the actual like research problem is, what the gap, the research gap is, the sort of this hasn't been studied by people, but it's important we should study it kind of gap. It's much easier to write all aspects of the proposal if you understand that, because you then kind of understand it at all times what part of the project you're trying to explain. If you don't have this fully clear, then you'll just try and there can be a tendency to try and fill these sections with stuff but it's not very well connected, and it's really hard to write because you don't know how to connect it. So that's the other big tip for written expression, for writing clarity, quality of writing, from a professional perspective. So I'll leave that there. Referencing, choose your own style, use it well. I will say as a bit of a marking tip, we're actually pretty brutal. This is one of the other sections that we mark. So your supervisor will mark these two. We'll mark this one fairly generously and this one fairly generously. Like we won't slam you if you don't get it perfect. We'll reward people who are clearly trying. This one we will absolutely slam you. Like it's easy to just kind of lose all 5 marks here just by being sloppy, or at least getting down to 1 or 2% out of 1 or 2 out of 5. You know, inconsistent capitalization, incorrectly italicized commas, discrepant formatting of DOIs, indents not being in the right place, all that kind of stuff. Like if it's sloppy, just like equates to basically nothing in terms of your overall score, but just you have been warned. It's a psychological intervention for you guys. If you're taking the marking and the feedback seriously, it's probably helpful to see if someone who's paying attention to your work thinks that you did a good job. So the corollary is that if you get, or the flip side is that if you get 5, even if you get 4, if you get 4 for this section, you should be like, all right, cool, good, okay, that's good. If you get a less than 4, it'd be like, okay, I need to keep working on that. Or you're just gambling on the hope that you'll have like a thesis examiner who doesn't look at your references carefully, which is pretty unlikely. There's one place that even people who are sloppy references themselves will point out referencing errors, is a thesis examination report. To digress a little. Yeah, and there's a bit of an element of how well you're actually incorporating this in text. Presentation guidelines, to skip on from referencing, presentation guidelines, pretty straightforward. PDF submission this time, usually Word, but this because we're sending it out to lots of different people, so we want it in PDF because it's more stable. Use your last name formula. Look up this guy if you care. Wrote an amazing, lots of amazing stuff, but a particularly amazing book about cancer. So like a popular history of cancer. Blah, information about the title, information about the subheadings, font, footer, plain format. Don't do any fancy formatting. I've come to really love the plain format, left aligned, for like presentation for MRES assessments. Just as a marker, it's actually, I quite often look at the, you might think, don't you know whose document you're reading? You can be flipping between documents, so you can be, just trust me, it's really helpful to have it the way we've aligned it. We've asked for it here. So I think that's it. I feel this is really deteriorating at the end of things. It's the end of a long day. It's 5:45 on the 15th of April. I didn't quite clock when this started, so you see me guess now. I don't know, is this 28 minutes? I don't know if that's an embarrassing guess because it's, I don't know if it's too much more than that. Might be a bit less. Let's say 28 minutes. I guess stop the share and call it there. I wish I had the stop button ready to hit there, because stop the share and call it there. It would have been great. Just snap out. Like, I missed the chance. I missed the chance. It's not going to haunt me though. I am going to call it a day there. And I hope you're having a good day wherever you are, or evening, or if things suck and are crappy at the moment, then my thoughts are with you. Yeah, in the grand tradition also of ending videos even more poorly than we start them, let's call that a wrap.